In August of 2005, Hurricane Katrina showed the world just what happens when Mother Nature is pitted against years of poor engineering. Extreme storm surge caused the New Orleans Levee System to fail, leaving the city inundated for miles, and causing $125 billion in damages. The imagery of a flooded metropolis was a kind that those around the world wished to never see again. Unfortunately, Mother Nature had other plans, and in August of 2017, she brought the worst inland flooding event caused by a tropical cyclone, right over one of the largest cities in the United States. Beginning as a tropical wave off the coast of Africa and crossing the Atlantic, Harvey was nothing more than a tropical storm that struck the Windward Islands before weakening into a tropical wave in the Caribbean Sea. But once it made it into the Gulf of Mexico, Harvey rapidly intensified into one of the strongest hurricanes to strike the Texas coastline in recent memory. Thanks to a complex meteorological setup, it stalled over the state of Texas, bringing over 60 inches of rain in less than a week, submerging major highways, businesses, and neighborhoods. Today, we will take a deep dive into Hurricane Harvey, covering its origins, meteorological synopsis, impact, response, and associated controversies, and the status of the impacted communities today. Welcome to Nature's Fury. On August 12th, a tropical wave with a large convective mass moved eastward off the west coast of Africa. 3 days later, on August 15th, convection rapidly intensified near the wave axis, leading to low-pressure center formation early the next day. High wind shear, which had prevented the system from organizing, tapered off overnight on the 16th, allowing for deep, organized convection to develop. On August 17th at 11 a.m. Atlantic Standard Time, the system was identified as potential tropical cyclone 9, upgraded 6 hours later to a tropical storm, and named Harvey. The system was expected to move through the Windward Islands and move into Latin America as a tropical storm. Harvey made landfall in Barbados on August 18th at 6 a.m., then over St. Vincent just a few hours later, producing minor damage. Pressing onward, Harvey became subject to increasing northerly shear, causing the storm to gradually weaken into a tropical depression, then degrading into a tropical wave by 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on August 19th. Over the next few days, the wave maintained its convective activity as it advanced northwestward over the Yucatan Peninsula. On August 23rd, the system transitioned into the Bay of Campeche, where persistent, deep convection near the low caused observable, well-defined circulation. With the guidance of the recon teams, the National Hurricane Center once again upgraded the system to a tropical depression. At this point, alarm bells were ringing at the NHC. When Harvey reformed, the National Hurricane Center initially predicted the storm to make landfall on the Texas coastline as a tropical storm. As days went by, the projected landfall intensity increased, with the storm eventually expected to make landfall as a major hurricane. For the coast specifically, the biggest threat was high winds and storm surge. The National Hurricane Center predicted storm surge values of 6 to 12 feet between the northern entrance of the Padre Island National Seashore to Sargent. While significant, these factors were not the largest concern. The true threat imposed by Harvey was further inland. Harvey was initially predicted to stall over southern Texas for multiple days, with later forecasts showing it briefly re-strengthening as it meandered back into the Gulf of Mexico before once again making landfall on either the northern coast of Texas or the western coast of Louisiana. Inland flooding was a major concern, as the Weather Prediction Center predicted maximum rainfall totals of up to 50 inches before Harvey left the state. Even outside of the forecasted maximum rainfall area, vast swaths of southeastern Texas and western Louisiana were expecting over a foot of rainfall. Unsurprisingly, given the expected stall-out period, many began comparing the system to Tropical Storm Allison, another storm from 2001 that stalled over Texas, causing extreme flooding in the Houston metro. In order to better understand the meteorological overview of the storm, along with some personal insight, I spoke with Matt Lanza, a meteorologist based out of Houston. As a meteorologist, he described the frightening forecasts that were in place for Harvey. Reading the NHC report of what the rainfall forecast were. You had the day one excessive rainfall outlook high risks lasted from August 25th until September 1st. And so I'm wondering, did any of that ring any major alarm bells once the rainfall forecast started coming in?
Yeah, so what ended up happening was I remember this very clearly. The total solar eclipse occurred that Monday. And I'd gotten in that morning and was looking at what was going on. And a couple of the models had started to stall out Harvey and had some pretty, what I thought at the time were ridiculous rainfall totals showing up in some of the guidance. I think it was like 30, 40 inches of rain. And I remember saying to myself, okay, well, sometimes models do like a convective feedback where they'll think they see a thunderstorm for a long time, and it ends up dumping a lot of rain over a small area. And that's kind of what this was doing. But at the same time, it was like, well, with a hurricane, you don't know that's going to be the case. I'd gone and taken a walk during the solar eclipse. It wasn't a total eclipse here in Houston, but it was, for parts of the country. And I thought that was, kind of a nice way to just get away for a few minutes and kind of like, all right, what's going on here? When I got back to my desk, I looked at the 12Z model runs that had come in, and sure enough, they were, continuing with, these ridiculous rainfalls. This was probably the 21st of August that we're looking at this stuff. And, just kind of examining it and being like, this is actually kind of serious. Like, if this happens, this is going to be a big flood, because it sort of got to the point where, okay, like you see this once or twice, you think, okay, maybe not going to happen, but you see it 3, 4, 5 times in a row. That's when you start to recognize that this is real, and you got to take it seriously. So, the hardest part at that point was trying to figure out, okay, is this rain going to fall in Victoria, Corpus Christi, Lake Charles, Houston? We had no idea. We just knew that somebody was going to get dumped on. By the time we got to Monday, and seeing that continue Tuesday, and then seeing, the forecast for Harvey itself as a hurricane ratchet up, made it just all the more likely that we were going to see a big, bad outcome. And it really wasn't until probably Wednesday that I felt like this is going to be Houston. Like, this is going to get us. And it's not going to be good. And at that point, for my day job, they sent us up to Dallas to make sure that we could still function in case we couldn't get to work or whatever. And so, I left like that night, and, by Thursday or whatever, I got up to Dallas and was like, hadn't slept much at all and was sick. It wasn't a good scene for a couple of days because, you just knew that this was not going to be good. But I had actually gone to an Astros game that, let's say it was Wednesday. I think it was Wednesday night with a buddy of mine. And, I was texting with someone that I knew at the National Hurricane Center, and, just checking in with him, making sure he was okay. And, he was checking in with me as well. And I remember him saying kind of vividly, like, we're really worried about this, that this is going to be really bad. And like, we all knew that, but to hear it coming from an individual in that environment, really hit.
Upon Harvey's reformation, the National Hurricane Center issued a tropical storm watch for Mexico and Texas, and a hurricane watch in the latter. On August 24th at 4 a.m., the watches in Texas were upgraded to tropical storm and hurricane warnings respectively. The tropical storm warnings would remain throughout Harvey's tenure in Texas. The National Weather Service began issuing storm surge watches and warnings for the first time. On August 24th, the Weather Prediction Center issued a Day 2 high risk for excessive rainfall in association with Harvey, with the high risk in place for the Day 1, 2, and 3 outlooks on the 25th. High risks for excessive rainfall associated with Hurricane Harvey would be issued until September 1st at 1Z. With the risks known, preparations began fast. On August 23rd, Texas Governor Greg Abbott declared a state of emergency for 30 counties, issuing mandatory evacuation orders for 6 of them. On the 25th, Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards issued a state of emergency, a mandatory evacuation order for Cameron Parish, and a voluntary evacuation order for portions of Vermilion Parish. In Louisiana, the National Guard prepared high water rescue vehicles and 500,000 sandbags. New Orleans was also concerned because of the city's diminished draining capacity. On August 9th, the sewerage and water board lost one of its power turbines, providing power to a majority of the city's pumping stations along the East Bank. The turbine was gradually repaired, but west of the Industrial Canal, the East Bank remained at risk until the additional turbines could be brought back online. Locals in Texas were filling up sandbags, and charities were preparing to help those who were evacuating by pre-positioning supplies. The city of Corpus Christi provided busing services for residents to San Antonio if they wished to evacuate. Across both states, schools began closing, long lines for gas were abundant, those along the coastline were boarding up their windows and leaving, and residents stocked up on basic supplies, such as batteries, generators, milk, and in the case of one Sam's Club in Texas, alcohol. Despite people's urgent departure from the coastline under voluntary or mandatory evacuation orders, nobody envisioned what Harvey was about to throw at the state of Texas. Late on the 23rd, Harvey began to rapidly intensify in a prime environment, with light shear, warm water, and high mid-level moisture. The western edge of the subtropical ridge steered the storm farther northward as it continued on its northwesterly track. On the 24th, the rapid intensification of the storm violently uptrended, as a large mass of convection accumulated over the center, allowing recon aircraft to observe an eye around 7 a.m. By 1 p.m. the same day, Harvey had become a hurricane. Over the next 24 hours, the storm continued to intensify, becoming a Category 4 at 7 p.m. on August 25th. Ferocious waves crashed against the Texas coastline as 6 to 10 feet of storm surge northeast of Harvey's center rushed inland. Heavy rain battered anyone misfortunate to be caught in the storm, and the wind ripped through everything in its path. Put simply, those along the shore in towns like Rockport were ripped apart by Harvey's wrath. At 10 p.m., Harvey made landfall on the northern end of San Jose Island with maximum sustained winds of 130 miles per hour and a minimum central pressure of 937 millibars, becoming the first major hurricane to make landfall in the continental United States since Hurricane Wilma back in 2005. 3 hours later, Harvey arrived on the Texas mainland, slightly weaker, with winds of 120 miles per hour and a central pressure of 948 millibars. Many knew that the scene along the coast would likely be a nightmare, but Harvey wasn't done, as it was about to cause the worst rainfall flooding event from a tropical cyclone in US history. Before jumping straight into what Harvey did, it's extremely important to understand how it happened and the meteorology behind it. Inland flooding events from tropical cyclones are nothing new. I've covered storms that fit under that category before, such as Tropical Storm Alberto from 1994 and Hurricane Florence. However, Harvey is an interesting case. One major connection that all these storms have is the presence of weak steering currents. Harvey's stalling over Texas was caused by the storm becoming embedded in light steering currents between one mid-tropospheric high over the Four Corners region and another high over the northern Gulf of Mexico. What's notable about Harvey is that most of the rainfall was not near the center of Harvey's track, but rather to the north and east of it. Matt told me what helped make Harvey such a prolific storm for flash flooding. Tropical cyclone stalling out is nothing new. We've seen it before, in case of what I've already covered, Alberto 94, which stalled over the state of Georgia for about 3 days. And then there's Tropical Storm Allison in 2001, and then Tropical Storm Allison in 1989, which both produced flooding in Houston.
Yeah.
And then there's Tropical Storm Lee in 2011. But Harvey is kind of, in of itself, unique in that sort of subset. So what were the meteorological elements in play for Harvey's flooding event, and how did those elements allow for the flooding to turn out the way that it did?
Yeah, so I think that with Harvey, the thing that was unique with Harvey was, all the previous storms you mentioned were tropical storms. That's not to minimize tropical storms, but there's just the reality that they are sort of in their nascent stages of formation, right? So they are still developing. They're not usually tremendously well organized. So you've got more of, I don't want to call it like blobby, but it's like kind of blobby, blotchy precipitation. So it's like you get these heavy totals. You can get high rainfall over a large area, but the real significant rain, the max totals from those type of events occur generally over smaller areas. It was the case in Allison in 2001, where it was right over Houston, particularly the north and northeast side of Houston that got it. Where the rest of the city, it had rain and flooding, but it wasn't to the levels that it was just in that part of the city. But with Harvey, you had a very formidable, very well organized hurricane that had a very symmetric and potent rain shield that followed the rules of tropical systems as it gradually worked up the Texas coast. And what happened was you had the diurnal cycle of tropical systems, where a lot of times at nighttime, as we lose the sun and we get the latent heat release in these storms, we get a lot of rainfall, a lot of blow up of convection, and that happened at time with when the east side of the storm was right over Houston. So you had this storm that was still circulating, fetching up all this Gulf moisture right into southeast Texas, while undergoing the typical diurnal cycle of a hurricane or tropical storm. And you just had everything kind of came together at the right or wrong time, I guess, for it to aim right at the Houston area. And then, as time went on, that gradually, worked to the east toward Beaumont. So that's why those areas got, 60 inches of rain, whereas Houston only got 50 to 55 inches. So you had a little bit more of a widespread impact because of the slow movement, the well organized aspect of it, and just this constant fetch because of the geography right off the Gulf. A lot of times, what you'll see with Texas tropical storms that stall out, or hurricanes that stall out, is that they'll come inland. They'll go to, like, say, Austin or parts of hill country or whatever, more like central to West Texas, and then they'll stall out. And because they're so far inland at that point, and the air's so much drier, you don't usually see as widespread of a situation, but you still get those pockets of, insane rain totals over smaller areas. Well, this just happened to do it right near the coast, so it was still getting just a tremendous moisture feed from a warm Gulf, in addition to all the other kind of factors that were at play with this. So you just had a worst case scenario hit at the exact worst possible moment for an urban area. And the flooding itself, if this had fallen on a rural area, there still would have been flooding, but the urban nature of Houston and the Beaumont area as well, exacerbated the flooding. You've got all this rain going through the bayou system, and there's just no place for the water to go in an urban environment, so things flood. And that's just kind of fully made it worse for Houston.
According to the National Hurricane Center, while the magnitude of this event was unprecedented, the synoptic situation was not, and previously has been associated with other tropical cyclone flood events near the coast. The flooding itself was unlike anything Southeast Texas had seen up to that point and since. For nearly a week, southeastern Texas would witness the power of Harvey's flooding. The 26th was merely the beginning. Roads began closing across the region. Bayous were being watched as they got close to overflowing, and rivers and creeks began rising rapidly. Come the next morning, some areas would have already seen 2 feet of rain. Flash flood emergencies began being issued the night of the 26th, but the situation was worse than what an emergency could entail. Rainfall rates of 6 inches an hour, 9.9 inches of rain in 90 minutes. Rainfall rates so fast that meteorologists were confused as to whether they could be real or not. Water began filling neighborhoods, parking lots were turning into lakes, rivers were reaching historic crest levels, and much of southeast Texas was deluged. KHOU 11 was forced to evacuate their studio during live coverage of the event, as water began pouring into their studio building. All the while, during the breaks of the pounding rainfall, the U.S. Coast Guard was frantically searching for survivors as people began rushing towards their rooftops to stay away from the murky waters. At the same time, tornadoes were touching down across the region from Harvey's outer bands, leaving those in the path in a hellish situation. The calls coming into 911 overwhelmed the system. Many went to Facebook and Twitter to announce their location, asking for help. Down on the ground, police and strangers were screaming at the top of their lungs, asking if anyone was nearby and needing to be rescued. The situation was so dire that emergency management began asking the public to help rescue civilians, as the scope of what was happening was unparalleled. Some residents didn't wait, going through waist-deep water to get to solid ground. The worst part was that southeastern Texas still had more than 3 days of torrential rains ahead in the forecast. Late on the 27th, a mandatory evacuation order was issued for all of Bay City, as the city was expected to be inundated by 10 feet of water by the 28th. Evacuations took place the next day after water was released from the Lake Conroe Dam. That same day, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers began controlled releases from the Addicks and Barker reservoirs in an attempt to manage flood levels, causing additional flooding to homes downstream. Meanwhile, a levee along Columbia Lakes in Brazoria County was breached. A fertilizer plant near Crosby, Texas was inundated by floodwaters, eventually catching fire and exploding on August 31st. Tyler County Emergency Management told residents to write down their name and social security number on their arms, as they should not be expected to be rescued given the severity of the flooding. Utter chaos would not be an apt descriptor. By the end of the flooding, of the 67 river forecast points in southeast Texas, 60 reached flood stage, 46 reached major flood stage, and 31 set records. Lake Creek at Sendra Ranch Road near the Woodlands crested at 150.96 feet. Spring Creek at Tomball at 166.35 feet. The list of absolute insane peaks goes on and on. The highest rainfall total was 60.58 inches near Nederland, Texas, with another report of 60.54 inches near Groves, Texas, exceeding the previously accepted record for the highest rainfall total from a tropical cyclone in the U.S. of 52 inches in Hawaii. The only storm that comes close is Hurricane Lane of 2018, which produced 58 inches of rainfall. 18 values over 48 inches were recorded across southeastern Texas, with 36 to 48 inches recorded in the Houston metro area. But the sheer coverage of rainfall totals in excess of 15 inches was incomprehensible. According to the National Hurricane Center, it is unlikely the United States has ever seen such a sizable area of excessive tropical cyclone rainfall totals as it did from Harvey. But Harvey wasn't exactly done. Around 10 p.m. on August 27th, Harvey's center moved back offshore over Matagorda Bay, slightly re-strengthening with deep convection reforming near and north of its center. Its intensification was limited due to strong vertical wind shear, reaching a final peak intensity of 50 miles per hour on August 29th at 4 p.m. The storm turned north-northeast due to a strengthening ridge over the western Atlantic. Harvey's center never moved more than 60 nautical miles off the Texas coastline. Heavy downpours still blanketed eastern Texas and western Louisiana. Harvey made its final landfall in southwest Louisiana at 3 a.m. on August 30th, with sustained winds of 45 miles per hour. The cyclone weakened over land, becoming a tropical depression, then an extratropical cyclone by 1 a.m. on September 1st, dissipating entirely the next day, marking the end of Harvey. Harvey was also a prolific tornado maker, producing 53 tornadoes across 6 states, including a few EF2 twisters in Alabama. But of course, the main focus was what happened in southeastern Texas and southwestern Louisiana, where history had been made. Harvey's path of destruction began on the coast, and while it's heavily overshadowed by the flooding it caused, the devastation was everywhere, beginning where it made its first landfall near Rockport. The Cove Harbor Marina and dry stock looked more like a mangled metal building than a marina. A local laundromat was left with nothing over its head, with some of the machinery still in the confinements of the property. Some houses stood no match, destroyed in one way or another. In one case, the top floor of a home slid off the building, landing next to the water. Major damage was reported all across town, regardless of how far away from the coast they were. Port Aransas was one of the areas hit the hardest. Many places were just flattened completely and debris littered the streets. The high wind damage was observed as far inland as Victoria, but most of the attention was across most of southeastern Texas, as that part of the state turned into one massive lake. The Houston metro area, one of the largest in the nation, looked more like an archipelago with multiple small islands instead of an actual city. Multiple interstates and highways such as I-10, I-45, and US 59 were blocked off entirely due to floodwaters. The normally bustling interstates was covered with water. The flooding stirring from the Buffalo Bayou went into portions of downtown. In Harris County, roughly 25 to 30% of the county was underwater during the peak of the storm. One house near Houston was surrounded by the floodwaters, left alone like an island in the ocean. Those near both the Addicks and Barker reservoirs suffered extreme flooding. Those reservoirs were built to help shield the city from floods. The released water from the Addicks reservoir further worsened the situation the neighborhoods nearby were in. The water treatment plant nearby was also inundated. Rivers such as the San Jacinto River and the Trinity River, alongside local creeks, flooded and caused extreme damage to numerous properties. Then there was where the worst of the flooding occurred, just a bit to the east near Beaumont and Port Arthur. Areas in the region saw 50 to 60 inches of rainfall, evident from the numerous subdivisions, roadways, and businesses submerged under the floodwaters. In Port Arthur, the Bowers Civic Center was overrun by floodwaters, forcing at least 100 people who were taking shelter there to move to the bleacher seats before being relocated to the Carl Parker Center. North of Beaumont, a bridge collapsed at Highway 96 over Village Creek near Silsbee. And then there was what was left after the waters finally receded. Piles of debris were stacked up on the sides of the roads for trash pickup, the debris coming from the ruined valuables and flooring from the once flooded homes. The homes themselves had lasting water damage, holes in the walls and roofs, and mold growing in various places. The impacts in Texas went further than the flooding itself. Several oil refineries across the state of Texas were overtaken by floodwaters and went offline for 2 days. As a result, the average gas price nationwide spiked to its highest point in 2 years, at $2.69, 48 cents higher than the previous year. The oil from those refineries started mixing into the floodwaters, alongside sewage from water treatment plants and various chemicals coming from who knows where. In total, Harvey killed 107, injured many, and caused $125 billion in damages. Tied as the costliest tropical cyclone on record with Hurricane Katrina, not taking inflation into account. But the flooding in Texas went beyond what the images described. There were also the stories being told. Across the areas hit, the same phrase came up: "This doesn't happen here." A sort of falsehood given that the Houston metro is one of the most flood-prone areas in the United States, given its local geography and proximity to the coastline. Major floods have happened before in the region, such as the case with Tropical Storm Allison of 1989 and 2001. What was clear was that the scope of the flooding was unlike anything ever seen before. That much was true. I spoke with Matt about his experience and what he saw from the flooding that Harvey had wrought onto the city he lived in.
Yeah, so as we came back, you could see north of Houston, there was ponding in places that shouldn't have been. But you could see what I really remember were seeing these houses with piles of debris in front of them. So they'd already ripped out their carpet and, all the other stuff to try and start, recovering basically. And it was just house after house after house. And this was just, one neighborhood in North Houston that was dealing with it. So I couldn't imagine all the neighborhoods that were dealing with it. Same thing when I went to go visit, family members that had flooded. It was like that for months afterwards. People were just getting to their house and, all this stuff on the side of the street that they were waiting to get picked up. and you look at that, and after a while, you kind of grow a little numb to it. But you have to remember, like, that's people's stuff. A lot of times we say, be grateful that you weren't hurt, nobody was hurt, you didn't lose your life. Like, be thankful for that. And yeah, the stuff is just stuff that can be replaced, but in a lot of cases it can't be. It can't be easily replaced. You can't get that life back that you had beforehand. Certainly not comfortably, because you're going to be living in fear constantly of flooding. And so we saw a lot of that, and that was really grounding, to kind of see. And it was just the duration of it. I mean, other than that, like, it felt like, by the Monday after, like, the city itself was kind of back to normal as you can be. Our neighborhood, like I said, didn't have any flooding. So, like, you just go around the neighborhood and it was like, there's puddles, like, it rained hard, but that was it. It was like nothing had happened. But then you've got these other neighborhoods that were just devastated. So it was really fascinating, illuminating, and, kind of disconcerting to see one neighborhood with just pile after pile of debris in front of people's houses, and other neighborhoods that looked like nothing ever happened. And just seeing that for months afterwards was really jarring in a lot of ways.
Yet, it's during the worst of times when humanity shows its best colors, and that was evident in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. On August 25th, President Donald Trump issued a federal disaster declaration for portions of the state of Texas. Trump and his wife Melania visited the state on the 29th, visiting Corpus Christi and Austin since they didn't want to interfere with the rescue efforts in the Houston area. He reassured victims in Corpus Christi that the US government was going to get you back operating immediately. He returned to Houston on September 2nd, speaking optimistically about the recovery effort, chatting with victims and volunteers, and helping place boxes of supplies, cases of water, and Red Cross buckets into the back of a row of cars. Trump said Texas was going to get the support it needed. In fact, Trump promised to donate $1 million of his own personal fortune spread out to various charities. A promise he kept. On September 8th, Trump signed a bill providing more than $15 billion in Harvey relief. The US military was also hard at work. The Coast Guard worked diligently to rescue survivors from their flooded homes. In total, the Coast Guard rescued 11,022 people and 1,384 pets. The National Guard was sent out to Texas to assist with the recovery effort, and the Army deployed more than 700 wheeled vehicles and 90 helicopters to help move victims and provide essentials such as bottled water. Normally in natural disasters, the majority of hopeful stories come out after the storm struck, but they were ongoing when Harvey was still over Texas. Neighbors were helping each other out, checking on them and helping others who were less fortunate evacuate to higher ground. Numerous strangers from across the nation came into southeast Texas with boats, canoes, whatever could float really, to assist with the rescue efforts. In total, about 30,000 water rescues were conducted during Harvey, done by the military, local law enforcement, and random strangers who came out for no other reason than to help their fellow American friends in need at their lowest point. Charities were active in the area. Operation Barbecue Relief pulled into Houston for 2 to 3 weeks, serving hot barbecue meals to first responders and victims. The Red Cross and Salvation Army were active in the region, and donations came in from all over, at an unprecedented rate too. Businesses donated at least $157 million, and that doesn't count individual donations. One story I remember came out of Oconee County, Georgia, where I live. I was in my study period for my AP government class in my freshman year of high school when my teacher began talking about Hurricane Harvey relief. Many charities and businesses were working on raising funds or gathering donations for Harvey relief in northeast Georgia. Of those was the Oconee County Sheriff's Department, who contacted Ladd Trucking in Watkinsville, Georgia, with assistance from Power Building Supplies to have a load of donated supplies shipped out to Texas. Originally, there was one truck set up in the parking lot of the county jail for people to drop off supplies on the morning of August 31st. The response was massive. People came in from Oconee County, but also from Barrow, Madison, Oglethorpe, and Clark counties to donate supplies. According to my teacher, what was originally supposed to be 1 truckload of supplies ended up being 5 to 6 truckloads, and the county had to get more trucks to transport the supplies. The county stopped accepting donations on September 1st due to how much was donated. Come the next week, thousands of pounds of supplies carried by a caravan of tractor-trailers, escorted by Oconee County deputies, made it to Texas. There were still 2 to 3 truckloads worth of supplies at the warehouse in Oconee County. That story always stuck with me. The overwhelming support from complete strangers hundreds upon hundreds of miles away is a story that was everywhere post-Harvey, and I'm glad to be in a community that participated in that. Multiple celebrities helped in the recovery effort, donating funds to charity. Of those was NFL player J.J. Watt, who was named NFL Man of the Year in 2018 for helping raise funds for those in Texas. In October, many in Houston were able to relax for a bit, due to the Astros playing their first home game since Harvey, against the Mets. The Astros wore a simple patch, Houston Strong, on their uniforms. According to the players, they were playing to give hope to Houston. That's what their role was in the World Series that year. Matt said that the Astros fulfilled their mission.
Yeah, it was really that. I mean, that was the one thing that united the whole city was the Astros that year. And it was funny, when the Astros started playing again, or they were playing their home games, I guess, in Tampa, for a time. And then when they finally came back to play their next regular season home game against the Mets, which I remember. And I remember because the Mets were started Matt Harvey as their pitcher for that game, which was, just ironic. And of course the Astros just teed off on them. But that was really the big thing. Like, you had people that were in their homes that were halfway repaired, that had TVs on stands, that were watching the World Series. And that's what kept a lot of people going. It kept people happy and upbeat. Something positive that was happening. In hindsight, obviously it was a little bit more nuanced than that. But at the time, at least, the reality was that was your hope. There was hope. It gave people hope, and to that end, it was good. Really, the city just kind of reopened, right? There were, like I said, there were neighborhoods that were ravaged and neighborhoods that were totally fine. And the totally fine neighborhoods probably outnumbered the ones that were ravaged, and that's where a lot of the downtown area, not that downtown wasn't impacted, they were, but the bulk of the downtown area was back to normal after a week or so. So we got people back to work, and the grocery stores stayed open, and HEB is always on top of things, so that was up and running. And it was just kind of a, here you go, like you deal with it, and otherwise you get back to normal. And for a lot of people that works, but there's certainly a lot of people that doesn't work for. People even to this day that still have not recovered from flooding. I think there's a great book called In Too Deep by Rachel Kimbrough, who works for Rice University. She's the head of the sociology department. It was a great book, and it was about Meyerland, which was one of the neighborhoods in Houston that flooded during Harvey, but also flooded 2 prior times in the previous 2 years, 2016, 2015. And some of these people rebuilt again after Harvey, after they flooded 2 previous times, then Harvey, and they still kept coming back. And it was sort of, the book went into details of what people's motivations were for doing that. And for them, it was they kind of knew what they were doing. They knew how to navigate the system afterwards, and could get back up on their feet faster than a lot of other people could. And there were a lot of people that were kind of unable to do it and had to rely on help that was hit or miss, and rely on assistance or just rely on themselves to figure it out. So it wasn't like, I think there was some element of regional help, assistance that were helping people, get back into their homes and businesses and whatnot. But for a lot of them, it was, you're on your own, figure it out. And it's not like they weren't without help. They had people that they could go to, but it was still harder for them, a lot harder.
When it comes to major natural disasters like Harvey, there are bound to be controversies and criticisms of the response. So what controversies were there? There isn't a whole lot to cover regarding this, but there are at least a few topics that can be delved into. Why wasn't there an evacuation order for Houston? A few days after Harvey made landfall, one of the biggest questions some asked was whether or not the city of Houston should have issued an evacuation order. Houston and the surrounding counties that were heavily impacted by the flooding weren't in one, and those communities who were later included in one were due to the reservoirs overflowing their banks. There are a few reasons, but Houston and evacuation efforts don't exactly have the best history. In 2005, Hurricane Rita was projected to make landfall in Texas. Considering that Katrina happened roughly 20 days prior when Houston was in the direct forecast, panic ensued. What followed was one of the worst evacuation efforts in US history, with more people dying during the evacuation than during the storm itself. According to the United Nations, the situation with Rita happened when the Houston metro area's population was around 4.4 million. When Harvey came moving through, the population was around 6 million, give or take. According to the mayor, if you give an order to evacuate, you are creating a nightmare. Houston's mayor told residents to stay in place, doubling down when Governor Abbott said that if he lived in Houston, he would head north. Houston's officials stated that their decision to not call for an evacuation was due to Harvey's main threat of inland flooding, not storm surge or strong winds. There is a greater level of uncertainty about what areas would be hit the hardest. Evacuation orders were eventually issued for portions of Fort Bend County and parts of Harris County. While ordering an evacuation order would seem obvious to some at first, given what happened during Rita and the shorter time window before the flooding raids occurred, it was likely for the better that the evacuation order wasn't issued. It was a screwed if you do, screwed if you don't situation. Flood insurance. A lot of the areas hit the worst by Harvey did not qualify or did not have flood insurance under the National Flood Insurance Program, or NFIP. The program is handled by FEMA and offers insurance and discounted rates through typical insurance providers. However, many didn't have it. Only 15% of homes in Harris County were covered by flood insurance. People are required to buy flood insurance if they have a federally backed mortgage and FEMA's maps show that they live in a risky area. However, that mandate has been poorly enforced. FEMA expanded the program with private reinsurers in 2018, and the agency surpassed $4 billion in claims to insured survivors of Harvey. For those wanting more information about the NFIP, I'd suggest watching the Last Week Tonight episode on the topic when you have the time, which will be linked in the description. Discrimination and violation of the Civil Rights Act. Okay, I'm gonna try and explain this the best I can. In 2022, the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, found that the Texas General Land Office, the agency charged with distributing $1 billion in federal funds from the U.S. HUD for Harvey relief, violated federal housing law and the Civil Rights Act by denying more than $1 billion in federal relief funds for Houston and Harris County. Initially, the Land Office gave Houston nothing in the first round of federal relief funding. 4 smaller cities in Harris County got funding, but none of Harris County's or Houston's proposals were granted. The areas hit the worst from Harvey financially. Local officials heavily scrutinized George P. Bush, the head of the Land Office, for denying the aid. The case was appealed to the U.S. Department of Justice, who declined to take action until the HUD completed a related investigation into whether the state also violated the Fair Housing Act. The Land Office gave the second round of funds to regional bodies to distribute locally, and Houston ended up receiving only a fraction of those dollars. The issue is still ongoing as of January 2024, and Houston has yet to spend $200 million in relief aid. The city has struggled to distribute the initial money awarded to them, relying on the GLO program. According to Houston officials, they just simply lack the people to administer the program itself. There is likely a lot I'm missing, but this is the best I can do without delving into the inner workings of the Houston Housing and Community Development Department. Although, according to the GLO, Houston has had a history of submitting reimbursement requests that did not meet HUD standards. Regardless, the situation still seems unresolved at the time of recording this. So, now the question is, how are the areas that were hit by Harvey doing now? Roughly 7 years ago, Hurricane Harvey became one of the most infamous storms in the Atlantic Basin. It's known for what it did on the coastline near Port Aransas and Rockport, but mostly for what it did in the Houston Metro, Port Arthur, and Beaumont. A well-defined storm that killed over 100 people and caused $125 billion in damages. As a result of Harvey's damages to life and property, the World Meteorological Organization retired the name Harvey in 2018, replacing it with the name Harold, which was first used in the 2023 Atlantic hurricane season. It's been 7-ish years since then, so how are the areas holding up today? Along the coast, many have been perseverant in staying. Rockport created an exhibit highlighting their journey recovering from Harvey. The recovery was so successful that visitors questioned whether there had been a hurricane to begin with. Notably, Houston and Harris County worked to raise homes next to the bayous, and the bayous got upgraded to help combat flooding. There are multiple projects that are still in the planning phase. The city is better prepared now, but there's still a long way to go. However, not everything has been smooth. Some families are yet to fully recover, and a few locations were straight up abandoned. Despite that, the population across the region, county-wise, continues to increase year after year. Many areas are doing better than they thought they would be, and absolutely nothing could stop them, and yes, I'm aware I'm about as subtle as a pile of bricks. In late April to early May of this year, a series of training thunderstorms across southeastern Texas caused the worst flooding event in the region since Harvey. Many areas north of Houston that had records set by Harvey were broken by this event. While information on the event itself is still being finalized at the time of recording, the conversation about flood mitigation has been brought back up again. For those who were hit by both, many are just fatigued. Also, this is a side note. About 8 to 9 hours ago at the time of recording this on May 17th at nearly 4 o'clock in the morning Eastern, the Houston area was hit by a massive windstorm that knocked out power for the majority of Harris County. Yeah, safe to say that this is not Houston's month. Despite the recent events, many are confident that these communities will continue to fight back against the odds. They got through Harvey, they can get through anything. Hurricane Harvey is a storm that nobody in Texas or Louisiana could ever forget. And it's a storm that I will not forget anytime soon. Special thanks to my proofreaders, those being Elliot, Gamma Ray, Ian Height, Neptune, and Nora, Celtic White for the character stills I use, Zinno, Cyanide Blue, and Crackalick for letting me use their music whenever I use it, Xavier Burns for providing me with the cyclone animation of Harvey alongside his icons, and everyone for watching. It means a lot. I want to give an extra special thanks to Matt Lanza for agreeing to an interview. For those wondering, the last time I interviewed a meteorologist for a storm retrospective was Nick Stewart, and that interview was done on August 1st last year. I'm gonna try my best to interview more meteorologists, but it's harder than you would think. I'm also gonna try my best to alternate between tropical cyclones and tornadoes so people get a mix of what they're getting. Special thanks to those subscribed to the channel Patreon or our YouTube member. Those being Ace Cooper, Ekrid Wolf, Montpelier, and the Car Wash Channel of Northern Pennsylvania and Ohio at the Alferia Army tier, Charlie Lichterman, Heldrake Zero, Husky, Michelle M, Tanner, and Worm Off the String at the Off Junior tier, and All the Blue Lights, Ash Pikachu, Brian Hawley, Dante DMC, Foscrew, Griff, Hannah Stormer, Jacario, Joey Murphy, Cara Kelly, Katie Scambalone, Colby, Liz Swaff, Miguel Medeiros, Nido-kun, Non-Binary, Rama, Sakura Cyclone Haven, Sherry Number 33, Sorestro is Bad at Gaming, Southwest Florida Elevators, Tefu, and Van Granny at the Ulf Mini tier. Man, I managed to get through all of that in one take. And everyone listed on screen at the Ulf Supporter tier. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you want to have access to full uncut interviews and my scripts alongside other things in the future, consider subscribing to the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member at the Ulf Mini tier. It helps me financially and will allow me to do in-person interviews in the future alongside other things that would not be possible otherwise. Anyways, that covers everything. If you enjoy what I do, consider liking, subscribing to the channel, commenting your thoughts, and sharing it around. I'm Alferia, you all stay safe, and I'll see you all soon.